Ladies and gentlemen, we are live, MythVision podcast. We're going to continue this series on a critical examination of the Easter story. But first, I want to speak to those who are Christians, to those who are believers, to understand, and I mean this, I know how sensitive this material really is. I understand how deep this is on an emotional level, how sacred this is to a believer. But I had to run into a crossroads at some point in my life where I said, I'm following the truth, right? My religion claims to be the truth, and I follow truth wherever it goes, which led me to the conclusions where I'm at today and continuing to search, continuing to learn and educate myself, but using a critical method. And the truth started to make me poke holes, made me realize maybe, just maybe, I don't know the answer to this. Maybe I was wrong. Can we get to that place? Are you willing to go there? That's my little apologetics back at you. Okay. I'm just saying we're humans and we're trying to find out what the answers are in this world that we live in. With that being said, let me give a quick plug. My friend Jonathan MS Pearce is joining me today, and I really appreciate him. He has a YouTube channel, A Tippling Philosopher. Go subscribe. It is down in the description. And also, if you will, watching this, any of my mods or friends that are on the chat, please post the link to the YouTube channel so people throughout the live will be able to subscribe and join and continue to help him by checking out his content as he continues to upload it. The book we're talking about right now is The Resurrection, a critical examination of the Easter story. Be sure to get you a copy so you can follow along and maybe go back through the series. I just made it into a series here on YouTube so you can watch from video 1 all the way till now. And finally, if I may, Dr. Bart D. Ehrman has an upcoming Christmas webinar. It's down in the description. It is mythvisionpodcast.com/Christmas. Go sign up and we'll be there all day, a long webinar on the legend and the history of the birth of Jesus. So, with that being said, welcome to the show, Jonathan. I appreciate you, man.
Thank you very much for inviting me yet again. You are a glutton for punishment.
I am. Well, I guess you are really, because you come here every time to check out this naked Jesus right here.
Do you know what?
We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. Jonathan MS Pearce, welcome back, my friend. I can't wait to take a dive into this chapter, a couple of chapters. Women.
I was just going to get excited about the naked Jesus again. I think it's not any Christmas come early; it's Easter come early. But yeah. So, women at the tomb. We're going to tackle two separate chapters today. Yeah. And that's the woman at the tomb, and then the lack of veneration of the tomb, which is, I think, a really interesting part of the puzzle. But we'll start with the woman at the tomb. What are your initial thoughts on that? You know, do you remember ever thinking that there were contradictions around this as a Christian?
No, there was no contradiction. One just mentioned two. The other one only had the focus on one, which was Mary Magdalene. So we reconciled. You go, well, come on, man. Mark's more concerned with Mary Magdalene, and one of the other gospels is really concerned about mentioning all or whatever. I'm just saying the point is that I don't think it was that way. I think it's all three women at the tomb in Mark. But I just lost you video wise. You there?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but your video went out.
Oh dear. Well, that's not good.
It's okay. Maybe there's an empty tomb behind the
Yeah.
screen. No, try your other camera. I mean, if you have to, it's fine to switch if you need to.
I know.
You're back.
I don't know what happened there. I think Jesus is stepping in to try and have a go. He's saying that.
So.
I don't know what's going on. I do apologize. This is a new camera. It's supposed to be really good.
Oh no, it looks great. It looks great.
Yeah.
So we just reconciled it.
Yeah, it's smooth over that one. Yeah, so the woman at the tomb. If we go back to the last video, we talked about the empty tomb, and we talked about the real problem there was with Mark claiming that the woman came to the tomb and then went away and didn't tell anyone. And this is Mark's literary tactic, his method of explaining why no one knows about the empty tomb. I would argue that Paul said nothing about the empty tomb because no one actually knew about it, because I think Mark invented it, or Mark's sources, or the people around Mark, whatever you want to, however you want to interpret that. But Mark created the empty tomb narrative and has to say, well, why does no one know about this already? Why am I the first person telling you this? This is because the woman ran away from the empty tomb and didn't tell anyone. Problem is, the subsequent gospel authors then say that the woman literally went straight away to tell the disciples, and they ran and checked out and verified the empty tomb. So there's a definite contradiction there. So that's what we dealt with in the last episode. But let's have a little bit of a deeper dive into the problems with the woman. So there's a bit of a time.
Just so everyone knows, we don't have a problem with women at all. It's just seems that there seems to be a problem here in the Gospels. Anyway, just letting our lady friends know, you know.
Actually, we'll come back to that because certain Christian apologists will say that this has to be true because it's the Gospels using women as attestation to the claim, and that's supposedly embarrassing. But we'll come to that a little bit later. The first issue is the timing. Now, some apologists will say, "Oh, you pick out these little contradictions; they're not really meaningful." But when this is happening all over the gospel accounts of the resurrection, it doesn't matter what part of the resurrection narrative you look at, there are these little contradictions all over the shop. Jesus says this and Jesus says that, or this happens, or these people are there, or there's one angel or two angels. Another example is the fact that when the women come to the tomb, Mark says that the sun has risen and all the others say it's still dark. So little things like this can make you think, oh, okay, what's going on? How come there is a discrepancy between these? Who are the sources? Why would there be a discrepancy? Does such a discrepancy add to the thesis that these accounts are not reliable, or does it add to the thesis that they are reliable? In fact, they're not just reliable. Many Christians would say they are inerrant. Well, if they're inerrant, how can Mark have them turning up when the sun has risen and the others saying it's still dark?
Yeah, it's very obvious. And this is what I said to Dr. Del C. Allison Jr. You know, I mentioned other contradictions, and he goes, you know, some Christians have just not gone through the Enlightenment. I mean, this is coming from a man who concludes ontologically that Jesus rose from the dead. And this guy is open to these errors, these differences, and they're definitely not matching. So at the very least, this series should strengthen someone to become more mature if they're going to remain a Christian, not double down into ridiculousness.
Yeah, because you have to jump through so many hoops, and the hoops just get repetitively. You know, you just have to do it more and more and more, and some hoops can be really big, some are tiny, and it's just, I mean, you know, or you can take the more obvious approach that actually, you know what, it didn't happen, and these are narrative fictions. But and the other problem there are many. One other problem for the account of the woman going to the tomb is the fact that this tomb is a place where a dead person has been buried, and the tomb will have been sealed, and it would have been sealed with a rectangular shaped stone that's very difficult to move. And the reason it's difficult to move is because you don't want grave robbers going in there, and you want to protect the dead bodies from X, Y, and Z. So I don't understand, and in fact, many people have pointed this out, that the women were going to the tomb without any way of getting the tomb door, the tombstone rolled open.
This is a really good one. So, like, all right, just so everyone is aware, right? The women go to the tomb for what? Right? It's like whoever authored this kind of didn't really plan this very well. But it's almost like they weren't thinking of it this way. If we're trying to be critical and think this isn't true, they didn't really think this went through. The women came to the tomb to bring herbs, if you will, and to, some people want to say, embalm, and you're like, no, that's not what it's talking about here. They want to anoint the body.
Well, you see,
right?
Mark says they want to anoint, but none of the others say they want to anoint.
Okay.
And of course, Jesus was already anointed at Bethany, and you've got the idea that you wouldn't anoint a dead body, and you wouldn't even embalm a dead body, particularly after 2.5 days after it's been, or depending on what your timing is, because there's so many different timings involved with the different gospels. But you just wouldn't do any kind of embalming with or anointing with a body that has been, left for that period of time. I mean, I'll read you some quote from Michael Alter, who has written this huge book on the resurrection, and it's a fantastic book, but it's 1,000 pages and goes into minute detail. I treat a lot of the stuff in my chapters as concisely as I can, but if you want real comprehensive detail, go to this book. Do you mind if I read a
Go ahead.
Quote? So, although this is from page 322 and 323, although Luke did not specifically state the reason the women brought the spices with them, it can be speculated that he too was implying that they came to anoint the body. Therefore, both Mark and Luke seemingly have their purpose for completing the burial rites, i.e. anointing Jesus' body. The intention to anoint a body that had already been anointed and one that had been dead for 2 nights and 1 day has been questioned. For example, Taylor, 1953, page 604, writes that, quote, "It is hard to credit the woman with the intention of going to anoint a body a day and 2 nights after death." End quote. Another problem with the purpose of anointing relates to the issue of linen. According to the Gospels, Jesus' body is washed, wrapped in fine linen and clean linen cloth, and the cloth mixed with the spices. It does not make sense for the woman to unwrap a previously properly prepared body, anoint it, and then rewrap the body with the now unclean and used stained linen. Furthermore, there is no indication that the women brought new linen with them to complete the burial process, so on and so forth, blah, blah, blah. Second, Cranfield, 1959, page 464, offers that to anoint a body after such a length of time, quote, "is not incredible, since love often prompts people to do what, from a practical point of view, is useless." So here we have the Christian trying to say, okay, it's not ridiculous, because actually people who really love, in this case Jesus, are going to do crazy things. It's that's not a good enough excuse. But
Jonathan, continue. Yep. My son needs me for 1 second. I apologize. I'm putting you full screen. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Right back. So the situation is that we have no real decent reason as to why the women were going to the tomb. In fact, Mark will have tells you that they went that they might come and anoint him. That's Mark 16:1. Matthew 28:1 says that Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the sepulchre. Luke 24 has them bringing the spices which they had prepared, and John 20 doesn't really specify at all why they went to the tomb. And so you have this contradiction as to basically why the women were there at all, let alone, contradictions about the time that they were going there. And you have further problems with Mark saying that they have bought the spices, Luke saying they had previously prepared them, and then the different timings involved with even the spices. So you get these tiny little details. Even the most basic of details are thoroughly problematic when you read the Gospels side by side. Because remember, as people like Bart Ehrman will say, you shouldn't read the Gospels one after the other. As in the Bible, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you should read them horizontally, not vertically. So you want to read probably the chronologically earliest one first. So I'd put, Mark, and then Matthew, then Luke, then John, but then read them side by side. So you're reading one verse that attests a certain thing, and then the the parallel verse in the next gospel and the next gospel and the next gospel, and when you go through it like that, you will clearly notice that the gospels are incredibly contradictory, and that they are really quite incoherent. So we have a problem with the timing of the women going to the tomb, why they went to the tomb, issues of the spices, and you wouldn't particularly need to be doing embalming or even anointing after a body has been buried for that long. In Matthew, you have an earthquake taking place. I mean, we've talked previously on the video that dealt with the guards at the tomb, Matthew's guards at the tomb, clearly fictional, a literary mechanism for Matthew to counter the arguments that Jews claimed that the body was stolen. So Matthew is the only gospel that has guards being placed there. It's a really convenient mechanism. And then there's an earthquake, and you have the woman coming across the, you have the guards there and an earthquake that takes place, and the stone being rolled away. So there's just confusion amongst what all the gospels are saying.
I apologize for that. My wife had just left, and so my son's over here. He always does this. He'll go and rag his mom, but now he's ragging me, and I'm in the middle of a live. Sorry, what did I miss?
I was just generally going on about just going over the fact that the timing's problematic. The reason that they went there seems to be different, and we had this. Is it to embalm? Is it to anoint?
Were you talking about how the timing would cause the markets not to be open in order to purchase?
So
Did you already go through that or not yet?
No, I didn't mention that. So that's an interesting idea. That if Mark is having the woman buying the spices, then on the holy day, if it's on the Sabbath, you wouldn't be able to buy the spices, and if it's even the evening before the Sabbath, Yom Tov rulings would say that you can't, that you just wouldn't be able to buy things because you're not allowed to work, and you have to adhere to the very particular Jewish rules. And so this could be why Mark is the only person that says this, and the later writers are kind of correcting him to say, well, actually that wouldn't necessarily work, because you do see this a little bit with the idea that later gospel writers correct some of the Jewish mistakes of, say, Mark. But yeah.
Super chat from Troy Miller. Thank you for the super chat, my friend. If you guys want to ask questions, I'm happy to bring them on the screen. Feel free to super chat your question and I'll pop them up. What about the super tall Jesus and cross and Peter? Now, I think this is is it the Gospel of Peter? It's definitely later. You know anything about that?
Do you know? So I've been wanting, ever since finishing this book and reading quite a lot more of Bart Ehrman actually recently. And he's quite an expert on the non-canonical gospels. I realized I need to research the heck out of the non-canonical gospels, because I used to and this will key into his point there. I used to think that the non-canonical gospels aren't particularly important because they're not the canon, right? Almost with the Christian belief system, until I realized that they were writing these things because there were communities around them that believed these things. Okay, it wasn't just that they were making up a tall story and that's that, and you're dismissing that non-canonical gospel because it's just obviously crazy, even though I'd argue it's an arbitrary line you draw down, and they're all crazy. Just because you draw it down here between the canon and the non-canonical gospels is arbitrary. I don't believe Matthew's claims, I don't believe Mark's claims, and I don't believe Luke and John's claims, but the idea that you would have these crazy stories of Jesus, even killing people in his youth and stuff like this, is interesting because people believed that. So there were groups of Christians and it's just understanding that there were these wildly disparate groups of Christians who believed very, very different things, and there was no uniformity. And that uniformity was a gradual process that came about humans agreeing over stuff. And now Christians look back on the Bible as some totally sacred, divinely inspired book, creating a single narrative, when that is absolutely not the case. And they had to, wrangle over what books were in there. And there were whole groups of people who believed completely opposite things to what the canon would tell you. So, I mean, I don't know the details of the tall Jesus on
the talking cross, the whole nine. Yeah, thanks a lot for that super chat, Troy Miller. I appreciate it. And of course, that always helps us here at MythVision. You were talking about the timing.
Yeah,
the timing's not the same. The Gospels can't agree on so many things.
No, and I think you were sort of touching on this, which is that the Gospels aren't really, I don't think, trying to do history here. And I think we Christians are always claiming they're trying to do history. So we even as skeptics just almost take on board that these are kind of semi-historical texts. But I don't think they're writing these stories to make to have all the those fine granular details make coherent sense. The women are a mechanism, and they're in there in order to get some kind of knowledge of an empty tomb. They are the witnesses to the empty tomb, and they then can go back and communicate this to the disciples. So
and you go into this too. I'm not trying to jump to it, where Bart Ehrman talks about the significance of women at the tomb. Most people would say this is embarrassing, but we'll probably be getting to that. I'm jumping the gun, aren't I?
Well, you are, but actually, why not? Let's just go for it. So we have the idea that the women, Christians will argue that it's called the criterion of embarrassment, that this must be true. Like the woman at the tomb, whatever narrative you want to create out of the four different stories, must be true, because it's embarrassing for women to be the people attesting this. And in the culture at the time, women weren't allowed to be legally allowed to be eyewitnesses in the court of law. And so therefore, to get this attestation, if you were going to make up something from scratch, you wouldn't have women doing it, because they're not reliable witnesses in the legal sense.
Here's the problem with this, and I've already pulled it up for you. Trust me, I did a little bit of homework before we came up here. This whole eyewitness thing, and they talk about, well, in the court of law. Okay, first of all, none of this is happening in the court of law. None of this, even the idea that the women were witnesses of the early resurrection. But look at this. John chapter 4, verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from that town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I did. Sounds like a woman's testimony carried weight to an entire town of Samaritans, which makes you kind of want to reevaluate, as Dr. Ehrman and other skeptical, critical scholars, and not just skeptical, I mean, critical scholars in general, Delcy Allison Jr. and others. I'm just saying, they'll say in the early Christian movements, maybe women played a bigger role.
Yeah, so Bart Ehrman admitted exactly that. He said, I used to hold this view as well. The women eyewitnesses were embarrassing, and I see its force. But now that I've gone more deeply into the matter, I see its real flaw. It suffers, in short, from a poverty of imagination. It does not take much mental effort to imagine who would come up with a story in which the female followers of Jesus, rather than the male followers, discovered the tomb. So he talks, or lots of people talk about the fact that women were particularly well represented in the Christian communities at the time. Women played crucial leadership roles in the churches, ministering as deacons, leading the services at their homes, and engaging in missionary activities. And women were also reputed to have figured prominently in Jesus's ministry, during his life and throughout the Gospels. And so the idea that they really are embarrassing sort of witnesses, or that their testimony is somehow kind of embarrassing, I don't think jives with what we know about women's participation in the early church.
Yeah, so was their testimony in John 4:39. Every time a woman testifies anything, it must be embarrassing at that point. No. I don't find that to be a good argument. And as Dr. Kip Davis said, this is such a stupid argument made by apologists.
Yeah, and it's made more stupid by the point of fact that the men have run away. So who else is going to be left? Right, the disciples had literally fled, and this is where we can draw back on the motif of reversal of expectation, where it's like the disciples are the people you expect to be. So this could all fit into the motif of reversal of expectation. You expect the disciples to be the ones doing all the good stuff at the end of Jesus' life, but it ends up being Joseph of Arimathea. It ends up being the woman at the tomb that are doing these things. So there is that as well. And also, women are the most likely to prepare the bodies of the dead anyway. So this is it all, I don't think that argument really holds up.
You make all these points in your book. Let me get a couple of these super chats here. Henry M, thanks for the super chat. He says, Council of Nicaea created Jesus in 324 AD by unifying his image and updating the Gospels. I don't find that to be a good case. I've heard a lot of people try to argue that Christianity was created, or if you will, actually made by the Council of Nicaea in 324 or something to that effect around this period. I'm going with scholarship on this and saying no. It's definitely earlier. And the earlier you get, the weirder Christianity gets too, by the way. So I don't see any reason why we have to make these kind of conspiracy claims, in my opinion. This is just
I think there's an interesting idea about finding a sweet spot of weirdness. Which is to say that, okay, here are a whole suite of claims from all these different Christian communities. Right. And as you go through the process from the Jesus death to 324, right, you go through this and further, you go through this process of trying to see which ones like work and which ones don't. I could imagine there'll be like certain communities, they'll say, how about this Gospel of Peter? And like, check out these stories. And then people go, nah, mate, I don't believe that. That is just a bit too nuts. And so there might be just a general process that's not like, it's not an intended process. It just happens to be a way of eventually coming to a settled canon, which isn't so ridiculous that people like prima facie just throw it away, but is just ridiculous enough to be believable in a way that people go like, this is incredible and really cool. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I just think that if I'm understanding your super chat correctly, the idea is that Jesus was like invented in 324 AD, and that's what I think it's trying to get at, but I could be wrong.
I know. I think this is about unifying his image, which is to say that we have all these different kind of sources of Jesus, but let's produce a canon which unifies.
I just kind of wondered, maybe the phrasing "created" wouldn't have been a good idea. Maybe they came up with the canonized version of maybe what they want Jesus to be. Scratch that. No, we don't want him giant angel Jesus. We don't want killing little kids, making clay birds turn to life. All of those kinds of Jesuses. We don't want the docetic or maybe the Gnostic version. We want this guy. We want this particular one. Maybe that's what he means. And in that case,
and it's spin doctoring.
Yeah. I don't really know how to answer that question in particular, though, to know, you know what I mean? We lost you again. You got sucked into a cave.
Yeah.
But it's okay.
Keep going. Do you have another super chat?
Yes, I do. Pet Mark, thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. Why do you think Jesus was stoned to death and then crucified? I think it too, in case there was a real Jesus. So,
I think that Jesus was stoned to death. I mean, we talked about this before in the death and burial video. I apologize for flashing at you, but Jesus was most likely stoned because that's what we know from historical sources and Jewish sources that it's the most likely thing that would have happened to someone who committed high treason or blasphemy. Okay, so it would have been stoned and likely then hung up as a deterrence until having to be taken down at sundown by sunset, and then buried ignominiously in a criminal's graveyard, either a shallow grave or a necropolis full of lots of sort of loculi, lots of mortuary holes where you just put the bodies in to then rot down, and then after a year you can distribute the bones if the families want them, because they've gone through ritual purification, give them to the families, and they can re-entomb them or reinter them in their own family tombs. But I think it too, in case there was a real Jesus, I don't know what that means, but there could well have been a real Jesus. In fact, me and you have talked about this, probably was a real Jesus, and he probably was stoned and then hung up on a post and then buried in a criminal's graveyard. So yes, I believe there's a real Jesus, but I don't think you'll ever find him, and he was just left to rot.
And what this would mean for your position, I don't know what position to take on this. you're cutting out the middleman of Rome playing any role. So by doing that, you kind of have like Rome pushed to the side as just part of the narrative, which you find there are problems in the narrative as to why I think you kind of make that not historical, so to speak, that Pontius Pilate crucified him, etc. Right?
Well, I think you've got two options, and actually both of them are plausible, which is Jesus went to Jerusalem and he annoyed the Sanhedrin so much that they got him executed for blasphemy, high treason, or Pilate executed him for sedition and, for claiming to be a king when that, not going through the due process, if you like. That would be something that Rome would take umbrage with. And, we have to do a lot of inference. I mean, this is doing history. What's the most probable thing that happened? It's one of those two. So Rome could well have, Pilate could well have executed Jesus for sedition, or the Sanhedrin could have got it done for blasphemy.
Thank you.
The Gospels try and make it very clear that Rome didn't do it because they want to blame the Jews because they're moving away from the Jews, and they're also appealing to the Gentiles in the Roman Empire. So to blame Rome is actually quite problematic. So you see in a movement, especially in John, of moving away from blaming the Romans and blaming the Jews. But that could have been politics, and it could have been the Romans who actually did it, and he could have been executed for sedition.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you for those super chats, my friends. So continuing on with women at the tomb, and you got sucked into the cave again.
Yeah. Oh, for goodness sake, this is crazy. Maybe I have to go back to my old camera, and then I'll look all blurred and horrible.
It's okay. So in the meantime, where were we?
Well, we're at the criterion of embarrassment we talked about, and the reversal of expectation motif. And then I suppose we can get on to talking about the angels, the contradictions of the angels. And
before you do, can I read something?
Yes, you can. We didn't talk about the contradictions of the actual who was there.
Okay, that would be right before I get. So we're in his book. For those of you who don't have it, I highly recommend you get it. Let me read something I thought was cool. When it came to the women coming to the tomb, right? This tomb is supposed to have a stone in front of it, whether it's round or square, doesn't matter. And these women come to anoint, embalm. I don't care what you think it is. At the end of the day, they didn't come prepared to have the stone removed. It's like they came not planning, or as the narrative has it, they're like shocked to find out it's already opened. Oh, wow. Like to come do their job. So here you write, this account is, and we're talking about who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb. This is Mark continuing. Looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled away, although it was extremely large. This account is highly suspect since they traveled to a tomb with a huge stone blocking their way without working out how to get into said tomb. But they needn't worry because there's literally a Deus Ex Machina.
Deus Ex
Machina?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
To save them having a totally wasted journey. Peter Kirby notes, it would seem more likely that they would have inquired at the house of Joseph for permission or assistance, or at least that they would have brought someone who would be able to help rather than acting like the fools that Mark depicts. This tends to lower the likelihood of the story. The point is on that is like, why are the women even on their way to the tomb?
Yeah,
so they wouldn't stop. They wouldn't go straight to the tomb. This would make no sense.
I mean, like we said earlier, so we whether it's anointing or embalming, it wouldn't happen. You've got contradictions aplenty, and then they won't even know how to open the tomb. But this idea of a Deus Ex Machina or Deus Ex Machina is a technique that playwrights use, and it kind of like a god out the machine. So you're almost like a god. So what happens is when you get your as an author and you create a story, right, and your character's in a right bind, right, and you've written this story that your character, how do I get my character out of this situation? And you just bring in a plot mechanism that just somehow almost magically gets them out of that. Like, oh, what a stroke of luck, this has happened, and they're like, that's your Deus Ex Machina that gets them out of a real bind. Here it's like the women are coming to the tomb. How do you get the door open? Well, you have an earthquake or the sun's kind of sun, or you've got angels. So the angels are like, oh, that's out, because a woman wouldn't just go and wouldn't be able to open a tomb and see, the whole thing's nonsense. So the angels come along, and they are the deus ex machina that just allow the woman to then have an open empty tomb.
So one of our myth visionaries, Alan Bird, and I thank you for the super chat, Alan. He says, "Are we accepting there was a tomb? I'm a tomb denier." So,
good man, and he's right.
Yeah, and I am as well. I granted, I'll say this, even though I don't think that the tomb was a thing. We do play in the sandbox. So, like, when you're talking to a Christian and you say, "Hey, I deny there was a tomb altogether." Sure, you want to die on the hill? Die on the hill. That's fine. At the end of the day, though, I'm willing to go as far as they want. I'll try, to go as far as I can. At some point, you just draw a matter of like, well, that's faith. At this point, you've literally ventured off of what we can know. I mean, you can grant that there was a tomb, and still, as you say in this chapter, if you will, the Sanhedrin moved the body, not saying, "Oh, hey, is this Mary Magdalene? Yeah. Oh, hey, yeah, we're moving Jesus over to stone CB. Make sure you go check that stone out. That's where the tomb's going to be at, and you can go find him tomorrow morning. That's where it'll be." They're not notifying these people. They're probably actually enemies of these people. And if these apostles, being men, fleed, because they would have been the ones who would have been killed next, possibly, then all you have are women there. Do you think they know? Probably not. So I'm just playing in the sandbox and saying, if we grant that, there could have been a body transportation. And here they are at an empty tomb with nobody in it going, he must have rose. I'm just saying.
So yeah, you and I, the last video was about how the empty tomb didn't exist, right? But what we do is we say, okay, I'm going to grant you the empty tomb, Christian. Even with the empty tomb, here's all your problems. So it's like, no matter which way you go here, you will have terminal problems that mean that you are not rationally justified in believing the story, right? So I will show you how the empty tomb it wouldn't have been a thing. But I will also show you how, even if the empty tomb was a thing, all the rest of the stuff wasn't a thing. Okay, in this case, I'll give you the empty tomb. Let's see where that's going to go, because this is going to be fun, right? Let's have an empty tomb, right? The woman, the angels, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, that's the nature. So what we didn't obviously go over, we forgot to go over because of all my camera issues and stuff. I do apologize about that. But you've got Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John giving different accounts of who turned up. So Mark says that when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might come and anoint him. So that's 3 people. Mark has 3. Matthew, now after the Sabbath, as it began to draw toward the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to look at the grave. 2. Luke and all his acquaintances and the women who accompanied him from Galilee were standing at a distance seeing these things. Miss out a bit. Now the women who had come with him out of Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Unspecified, but at least 4 or 5, and possibly a shed load, right? John, now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came early to the tomb while it was still dark and saw the stone already taken away from the tomb. So she ran and came to blah, blah, blah. So that's 1. Yeah. So you've got 2, you've got 3, 2, 4 or 5 or loads or 1. And it's the same with the angels. So when we come to the angels, it's either no angels, 1 angel, 2 angels, right? And this is a Christian apologetic that really gets my goat. Okay, it really annoys me. And I'll give you a sort of quote to sum up what the argument is. But
all right,
this is from the Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, CALM. This is talking about the. If there are 2 angels at the tomb, then there was at least 1, right? So by saying 2, you can mean there's at least 1.
I put a star next to this, by the way, because I was already like, but go ahead.
So just because 2 authors choose to mention only one of the angels doesn't mean that there is a contradiction in Scripture. If Matthew or Mark had said there was only 1 angel, then that would have contradicted the other 2 writers. only one angel. These first two gospels never say there was only one angel. They just simply chose to write about one of the two. Now, what this is bonkers, right? And it annoys me because it means that they're saying that whenever you give a number, if you don't say the word only, the number you are giving. So imagine going to a court of law, right? And saying, so how many people robbed the bank? And you're saying there were 2 people. And me saying there were 2 people means any number from 2 to infinity. It's literally, I'm saying there are 2.
Yeah. You're not wrong if there were really 6. You're just saying there was 2.
Yeah.
It's stupid. Yeah. Nobody writes like that. That's nobody's giving accounts, especially eyewitness accounts. And you're going to fabricate BS like that. You're right. That's a great point.
So when you say, oh, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb, and another gospel says Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, you say, well, the first one was that's not a contradiction because Mary Magdalene went to the tomb, but there were others there as well. He just chooses not to talk about those other ones. It's like, oh, come on. No, people don't. That's not.
There's only one motivation behind why you want to do that. And we all know what it is.
Harmonization.
We all want to know. I got like 4 super chats. You want to hit them real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, Ben, my man, the brilliant genius. Can you clarify how the death penalty worked? Rome is needed to execute Jesus, but Herod takes John the Baptist out directly. Kingly privilege?
I think there's a real issue here. There's all sorts of problems going on because you've got and we talked about this in terms of Yom Kippur. You've got Pilate seeming to pull all the strings, right, and saying, and then having, freeing someone because it's a religious holiday, but Jesus Barabbas. But of course, we talked about that being Yom Kippur, where he's like an identical goat to Jesus. He's called Jesus Barabbas, Jesus, son of the Father. Jesus is the son of the Father. That's what Barabbas means, son of the Father. So you've got these 2 people. Pilate lets one go free. There's no evidence that he's ever done anything like that he would let people go free for a religious festival, blah, blah, blah. But Pilate's the one in control here. The Sanhedrin are also pulling the strings, and they're sort of doing things in cahoots with the Roman, rulership. And so it's all a bit of a problem. There seems to be a lot of going to Pilate to ask permission for stuff and going to Pilate to get sanction for this happening. And
the point is, like, would that even happen? I think that's what Ben's trying to say. Like, really, is Rome really even needed? If King Herod can go and just take John the Baptist out straight up without even needing Rome's help, like.
Well, the Judea at the time did have sort of treaties with Rome. So for example, one of the things we talked about in the honorable death and burial video, or dishonorable, is the idea that Jesus would have been taken down by sundown. Now, Romans in the rest of the Roman Empire would not have done this, right? So I used to argue this, that Jesus would have been left on the cross, like John Dominic Crossan would say, so to be picked up by carrion and eaten by wild dogs and all this kind of stuff, and would have been left there for 3 days as a deterrent to all those other people. But that's in contravention of Jewish law. And so the treaty that the Jews had with Rome gave some wriggle room and elbow room for Jewish law to be enacted under Roman rulership. And so without knowing all of the details about that, there is this idea that there is some wriggle room for Jewish religious laws to be upheld, because at the end of the day, the Romans did want to rule, and they ruled with an iron fist to some degree, but they also didn't want uprisings and problems. So
which is exactly what Vespasian says according to Josephus, where he's like, look, even Vespasian's like, we gave you jurisdiction to rule your own people. We appointed people of your own people, the way that it's phrased. But yeah, I hope we clarified that question, Ben. I don't know if we quite answered it, but I've got like 4 or 5 other super chats, and I'll be looking out for his follow-up if for whatever reason we didn't quite tackle that. Sound good? That's cool. Good. Thank you, Cool Ledge. Thank you for the 666, my friend. I love it when people do that kind of stuff. Like, someone's going to watch this later. Is going to go, oh, I knew it. Illuminati, Satan worshiping, like all that crazy stuff. I think it was the zombies in Matthew that helped them move the stone.
Oh, brilliant. Yes. I mean, we shouldn't forget the zombies, because I mean, I say we shouldn't forget them, but all of Judea forgot them, because they're not attested to anywhere in any Jewish history. You know, Josephus, who's like giving you the minutiae of all the stuff that's gone on in Judea over all this time period, forgot to mention like zombies parading around Jerusalem that apparently everyone saw, as attested to by Matthew.
Yeah. I mean, it's more important to us than it was the people that lived around that time. Totally get it. Stop scamming, man. Thank you so much. Only Matthew says there were guards, and even this says they were only posted after a day. Jesus rising from the tomb makes for a more dignified resurrection than him bursting from mud like a zombie.
Two things. We covered this in the go and check. I don't know if Stop Scamming Man has checked out the previous video on the guards at the tomb. So we spent a whole video doing the guards at the tomb, which is well worth looking at. But he's absolutely right. This was a technique, a mechanism as a counter argument against the Jews who claimed that the body was stolen. And so Matthew was the one that said, no, they weren't stolen, because we put guards at the door, but he left the day. So even then, it doesn't really make any sense. And the second thing about this, Stop Scamming Man, go and check, if you've never seen it, on YouTube, a video called The Fist of Jesus, right? It is possibly the greatest thing you will ever see on YouTube, apart from all of Derek's videos.
Oh, send the check when we're done.
The Fist of Jesus is a Spanish creation of a zombie movie made of just not quite amateur, somewhere in the middle of amateur and professional. I mean, it's a beautifully put together piece of just a B movie zombie flick of Jesus raising someone from the dead and then becoming a zombie, and then zombie apocalypse with Jesus attacking people with fish, and it's the greatest thing you'll see. Fist of Jesus, go and see it, everyone.
All right. Sounds like a horrible pornographic, but thank you so much. Stop Scamming Man. I appreciate you. John D. Could Paul have invented Jesus from Philo's logos and made it the awaited Messiah, as well as the everlasting atonement for the Jews from the event of the destruction of the temple? Jeez, John.
Well, I've got to unpick that.
Yeah, there's a lot. So first, the Philo's logos, Jesus, and there seems to be a reference here that Richard Carrier talks about that may or may not, like, he's not dogmatic, but it may or may not refer to this angelic celestial logos type of, idea that we do see in John, with in the beginning was the logos and whatnot. But as far as your personal thoughts, do you think Paul, sure, it's possible. Don't get me wrong.
The problem is that so many of these, it's the parallelomania against, parallelophobia, and there's illusion. The problem is when you've got a landscape that has all these motifs and ideas in, and you see this over here and this over there, there could be connection. It could be coincidence. It's impossible to say. I mean, how do you prove one way or the other? And I think all you can do is a probability analysis based on how much similarity there is. But it's really difficult. I mean, I think someone like Robert Price, as much as I like a lot of Robert Price's work, I think there's maybe a case of throwing as much stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. Where some of it is like a bit of a stretch, and some of it, I really do get that, and all of it might be true, or none of it might be true, or some of it might be true, and it's very difficult to try and say with any kind of certainty what illusions or what mimesis is going on, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, right, John, this would be my personal, and thank you so much for the super chat too. My personal would be to make a list, right? Come up with a list of theories that seem to make sense to you, and be agnostic, right? Be someone who doesn't know. Don't be dogmatic, and say these seem to be possible depending on how you take the puzzle, and you want to shift that puzzle, depending on how you want to interpret the data. And I would take it from there. But as far as I'm concerned, I lean there was a guy. So whatever logos was slapped onto him I think that's a later embellishment in John, right? So Mark's not seeing Jesus as the Logos. The Logos comes in John, which is our last or second to last, depending on who you ask. Some say Luke is later than John. Just depends on what scholar you ask. M. David Litwood thinks that. But
I think, yeah, sorry, Karen.
No, they're just mythologizing. No. They make him legend more so. So if they ended up making him a god in the heavens and pre-existent and come down from heaven and all of that, even a couple decades after the actual resurrection happens, I'm okay with that still being slapped onto a historical guy. I'm also okay with him never having had existed. I just think that it's more probable, leaning on the evidence, saying, this seems, you couldn't ask me for the thumb bone or say, hey, give me some empirical data. No, no, we're all going off these ancient texts. So, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, Bart Ehrman talks about exaltation versus incarnation Christology, where you have, I think, in Paul and the early Gospels, this idea that Jesus is a Messiah that moves on to John then starting to talk about, the Logos, Jesus being God. Where Paul sits in this is interesting, but certainly the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I would argue, think he's a Messiah. So they don't think Jesus is God, but he's like a divine figure that is exalted up into heaven, that sits, in an important place and is a divine figure, but is not God. Mm-hmm. What Paul thinks, is Paul more aligned with John, or is Paul more aligned with the synoptics? I think there's room for some discussion there.
Yeah, that could be debated. It's just not something to be dogmatic about. Thanks so much, John D. Appreciate the super chat, my friend. Stop Scamming Man, thank you for the super chat. In Luke, it speaks of them not initially recognizing Jesus. I wonder if this has its origin in a person claiming to be Jesus after he died.
I think this is a common motif. So you get this in a lot of stories, like the Road to Emmaus. You get this, which is not recognizing someone until a certain thing happens. It's a really common motif in a lot of ancient writing. And I think this is classic. So you've got Mary not recognizing him, thinking he's a gardener until he says whatever he says. Mm-hmm. And then she's like, wow. And I just think that's it's a common motif.
Yeah, and I think Dale Allison said in that particular Luke, this is where they're on the road. I think they're traveling, and he tells them, and he stirs the fire up within them, and then they break bread when he goes in at night, and then they recognize him, and boom, he disappears.
Yeah. So this is clearly not historical, because no one would walk down a road with someone that they knew, speaking about story, letting them tell you story after story, and then not recognize them, and then you sit down and break bread, and then you go, oh, that's Jesus. No, like that would never, ever happen. But it's not designed to be historical. It's theological. This is why I always say, like every video, I try and say it's theology, not history. So what is Luke trying to tell you? Luke is saying something about, Jesus is in the bread and the wine, is in the breaking of the bread, and there's a theological point that Luke's making. As well as drawing on a literary motif of not recognizing the person until like a particular thing happens.
Yeah, even Dale Allison, like I was saying, was just simply this is clearly a story. He says this, and there's plenty of stories out there that are like ghost stories, actually. So he thinks this is close to a ghost type story. Admitting that's kind of strange. It makes you kind of think about, what else might have been ghosts that got solidified? Michael Apple, thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. If you flip that 999 upside down, you're touching on to our buddy who did the 666. So getting close. I'm just being funny. Delcy Allison's notion that magicians stole Jesus's body for materials is a hilarious answer to the missing Jesus, assuming a tomb. Great channel. Thank you so much for that, the super chat and the funny statement. I did tell you this, right? That he said, I told him, Del, you said in your book you have 4 U's inside of you. I like played along with this, and I said, touching on the skeptical one, if you had to, which one best describes the data that you are already believing is the case? If you were a skeptic and he did not rise from the dead, what is the best explanation in your opinion for why Jesus is missing? And in him, he didn't go like, well, they moved the body to a different tomb and that was it. Like he said, magicians stole Jesus' body to use his body parts in magical incantations. And I'm thinking, if that is true, if that really is what happened, what kind of practical joke is that to all Christianity?
No,
honestly?
but yeah. But the great thing is, I mean, we'll talk about this in the very last video we do, which is naturalistic explanations of what might have happened. Okay. You can come up with all sorts of bonkers theories. This one sounds ridiculous, but actually there's precedents. We know that the necromancers or shaman or whatever, you used parts of dead bodies, or this is a thing, right? This kind of thing has happened, and people robbed graves. This has happened, and so therefore that as a thesis for explaining the data is more probable than the Christian thesis. So you get to this weird situation where you can propose almost any naturalistic theory, the twin theory, that Jesus had an identical twin and that Jesus was actually killed, but then the twin was alive and then came and took his body out and then walked around going, look at me, I'm alive, or whatever. That's clearly is not going to have happened. Yet it's still way more likely than the Christian thesis. So that when you're talking about probabilities, these far out theories are still much more likely than the biblical account.
Thank you so much for that response. And Michael Apple, thank you for the super chat. Mike, Zachary, I appreciate the super chat. He says, regarding the whole zombie thing, are we supposed to believe this really happened and there was no historical recording of such a significant event?
Again, we dealt with this in a previous video, but man, it's always worth bringing up the zombies again, because it's not just the zombies. So Matthew has an earthquake. He has darkness, probably 3 hours of darkness. He's got the tearing. We've got the tearing of the temple veil, which is a very thick piece of material that's in the Holy of Holies in the temple at Jerusalem, and we got zombie saints parading around Jerusalem, which everyone saw, or many saw. So you've got 4 incredible events, and none of them are attested to outside of either one gospel or a couple of gospels. So I think Luke's got the veil and the darkness, maybe. But so these are incredible claims, and as we talked about right about the beginning, incredible claims require extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Do we have extraordinary evidence? No, we don't. So regarding the whole zombie thing, are we supposed to believe? No, we're not. We're supposed to believe, but we shouldn't believe. We're not rationally justified in believing that happened. Absolutely not.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, after watching The Walking Dead, though,
who knows?
You never know, right? I mean, our friend here in the chat, Papula, I hope I'm saying your name right. He'd probably agree with us here now that we watched The Walking Dead. It seems to be more plausible that the zombie scene is real,
I just like the idea that someone, and I said this to you before, that someone in Jerusalem just gets out a crossbow and just takes out one of the saints, just thinking, there are zombies around here. Kill them. We're going to be attacked by zombies, and like shoot some of these saints. And you got like Elijah just go, or whoever, just like, I've just come back to life. I've been killed again. Oh, what are the chances?
You're silly. So we Carm has a ridiculous statement, getting back on track, that these women, and you could have one and then you could have two and you could give a number. And I wouldn't be shocked if they reversed it, even if they said it had 2, but really there was only 1. I mean, obviously it wouldn't work because they would just go with the one that has more. And they would just say, well, that one was just focusing on 1 instead of 2. Anything to keep this thing working and harmonizing all 4 gospels seems to be their goal.
Yeah. So we have this same problem with the angels. So we could get on to just having a little chat about the angels, because we've generally talked about. I mean, you can go into so much detail. So just talking about the timing of when the woman left and got to tomb. So if they were getting there it was still dark, as according to the some of the gospels, then they would have had to have left really early. Is it realistic that women are going to be walking around at like 4 a.m. or something, going to a tomb and not being able to open the door when they get there? So it's all kind of ridiculous. And you look at someone like Michael Alter's book, and you've got 20, 30 pages on just these kind of issues. So you can go into massive amounts of details just about the woman's intentions, whether it was logistically plausible, and all these kind of things, and what spices you'd need. I mean, you look at John, you've got Nicodemus and like 100 weight of spices. It's just utter nonsense. But yeah, so I would just argue that the woman at the tomb, no matter what claim you're looking at, is problematic. But let's have a little look at the angels at the tomb. So when you were a Christian, how did you harmonize the different gospel accounts of the different number of angels?
We went with whatever the total was.
Yeah.
So like let's just say there's 3 or there's 2. Okay, here you have 2 and one only mentions 1. That author was only mentioning 1 because that's all that he needed for his explanation. It didn't mean there weren't 2 there, though. That's the kind of like mindset, because you start with this is true. You start with this as historical, not theological, even if there might be theology in it. You start with this actually happened, and this is exactly true. So you starting with that, you have no choice but to try and fit the square peg into the round hole. However, and so what you do is you go, well, what gospel has the most angels? And if they mention only 1, that author either knew there were 2 or saw no reason to include the second one for his own personal use. The other one just mentioned more. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So it's the calm approach. Yeah, it's that apologetic approach. Yeah. So there are different accounts in the Gospels, as we can expect these days, from what we've seen already. So Mark has Mary, and Salome, and entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right wearing a white robe, and they were amazed. Matthew, Mary, and some guards were there as an earthquake hit, and an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled the stone away and sat upon it. And his appearance was like lightning and his clothing as white as snow. So again, quite a different account there. And we've got an angel sitting on a stone. Luke has the women who had come with him out of Galilee entered the empty tomb with the stone rolled away, and they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were perplexed about this, behold, 2 men suddenly stood near them in dazzling clothing. And John has Mary Magdalene alone came to the tomb when it was dark, saw the stone rolled away, found it empty, got some disciples, who saw it empty, and walking away, saw 2 angels in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet where the body of Jesus had been lying. So we have 4 really different accounts of the angels here. Again, does this reflect accuracy or not?
Well, ask any fundamentalist, they'll say yes. And then they will find a way to have, well, he was sitting on a stone because that's what happened before he rolled the stone and then disappeared or went inside the tomb. Like, I can only imagine the kind of weird connecting you could do to try and make all of this work somehow. The story would be, it makes me kind of wonder what the diatessaron would have looked like in this particular area. That author, whoever is combining the 4 gospels to create the diatessaron, I have to think in my mind, like, what did he cut and snip to make it somehow work? And I just wish we had that so that we could look at it and say, maybe this is how Christians had been telling the story. If they didn't have a text and they just shared it of what happened, maybe they found a way to glue these various stories somehow together, but they definitely don't belong. They're different authors.
Yeah, it's problematic. And then it's interesting that you get the Gospel of Mark has this young man in white who appears to pop up quite regularly throughout the Gospel of Mark. So the word is the Greek word is neaniskos, which is this young man in white. Now, it depends whether this is what I'm going to say is even more coherent if you believe in the secret Gospel of Mark, but I know that there's a lot of thought that that's probably a forgery.
Right.
Have you done videos on it?
I haven't done, like, I have asked scholars about that particular book, whether it's forgery or not. Most of them think that it most likely is. You can't be dogmatic because he was such a brilliant man. Yeah, I mean, like the guy, they always say, like, if it weren't for such an intelligent guy who could create a forgery like that, who found it, it'd have been better that someone else found it and not him. But at the end of the day, give us the details if you don't mind.
Yeah, so the Secret Gospel of Mark is a longer Markan text alluded to, left to the church in Alexandria, and reported in a now lost letter, the Mar Saba letter from Clement of Alexandria. So the letter has now been lost. So we now only have photographic evidence of this letter. Some scholars suggest that this young man is the same young man that Jesus raises from the dead in Secret Mark. Okay, but even if you don't think Secret Mark's, even if you think it's a forgery, there's still this appearance of this young man throughout Mark. It's just this young man appears a few more times in Secret Mark. So let me just give you an account here. So we first see this young man in Mark 10:17-22 in the story of the rich man whom Jesus loves, a man, quote, who is a candidate for discipleship. We then see him in the first secret Mark passage after Mark 10:34 as someone whom Jesus raises from the dead and subsequently teaches him the mystery of the kingdom of God, with the young man coming to love Jesus. The third instance is found in the second secret Mark passage at Mark 10:46, in which Jesus rejects Salome, the sister of the young man, and his mother. Next, we see him in the story of the escaping naked young man in Gethsemane. So, of course, that Gethsemane story doesn't really make an awful lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Mark 14:51-52. And lastly, he is found in the story of the young man in a white robe inside the empty tomb, when he informs Salome that the other woman that Jesus has risen, Mark 16:1-8. Seen chopped up with the missing parts in the canonical Gospel of Mark, this narrative is somewhat lacking in its coherence. However, as a repeated figure in the secret Gospel of Mark, he is much more coherent and not an angel. So you can argue that Mark isn't actually including an angel, that this young man is just this young man, that's some kind of literary technique. So some scholars have thought that secret that young man represents you, the reader. You're like this it's this kind of everyman. This is from Marvin Meyer, and I know he's a big fan of the Secret Gospel of Mark, and so, whatever, you can take this with a pinch of salt. But he claims this is a youth, the sort of character we have seen, who crops up in an ancient literature in stories of fear and flight, as well as scenes of initiation and discipleship. The youth, presented with familiar literary images, may function as every man, every woman, every disciple, in a manner that recalls aspects of the presentation of the beloved disciple in the Gospel of John. Mark's youth, termed a neaniskos, is a rich inquirer who hesitates but eventually turns to Jesus as a disciple that loves Jesus and is loved by him. He is brought from death to life by Jesus. Still, his uncertainties follow the uncertainties of the other disciples. As they flee from the crucifixion, he also flees. But at the end of the gospel is the youth, and only the youth, who is in the tomb, identifying with Jesus in life and in death. So there is an account to say, I mean, I don't know, I'm not going to die on this hill, but there is an account, there is reason to suggest that this angel is not actually an angel in Mark, it's a young man.
Right. So it could be a young man, and I really highly recommend checking out Dennis MacDonald's position on this as well with the Homerics, because there's something there. Troy Miller says the women were an ancient beauty pageant, and I saw some comment down below saying something that, yeah, but if let's say like the judge of the beauty pageant were calling out someone's name, they would have been Mary. Mary would have won because so many Marys. So either way, Mary wins on that one. Good super chat there. Thanks, Troy. I appreciate the help. I just want to mention that I do have a series of videos on the Patreon. This one right here is exactly what you're talking about. The naked young man in Mark. This is with Dr. Richard Carrier and Dennis MacDonald. And we talk about this. This has not been released to the public yet. I've got like 400 or 500 videos on this Patreon that have not made it onto YouTube. So the only people who have seen it are people who are on Patreon. This whole video deals with this in depth for the whole Homeric connections. And then there's another one. I have to scroll way up here because, I mean, it's way up here. Forgive me here.
It'd be interesting to see what they say about that. So they're saying that it's a figure taken from the Homeric epics, or sort of a bit of
that's Dennis. Dennis and Richard Carrier's jaw keeps dropping when Dennis keeps saying these things. Like even because Richard is very like cautious and careful and thinks cautiously about anything, but he starts giggling like because he knows this stuff. He just never thought to connect any of it.
Yeah.
And then he hears it and he starts going, "Oh man." Like, oh, I didn't know. And having that, watching Carrier's face glow when I sat on the balcony with him on the back patio, listening to Dennis, and then Dennis vice versa, was an experience. I was sitting there going, dude, this is good. This is good. There's another one with Del C. Allison Jr. I actually asked him about the secret gospel mark, and he responds, but I've got tons of them. I did one with M. David Litwa. I asked him about the secret gospel mark. He went pretty like 20, 30 minutes into it. So turned out really, really well. I just wanted to make a little plug for the Patreon at the same time, let people know there's other alternative explanations, but these guys aren't saying that it technically was an angel. You know what I mean? Like you're saying, this could have been an actual young man, and what it meant is an interesting thing. I don't even want to butcher it because you might need to watch the video and get your insight on that, because you might want to adjust that chapter somewhat. I don't know.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, it seems pretty clear using the same word that even in just the canonical Gospel of Mark, that young man has appeared 3 times, and so you're wondering what Mark was trying to do there. There is some kind of theology or something, some kind of mechanism he's drawing on or trying to use to some end. Again, who knows? So what do we learn from all of this? Well, what have we got so far? We don't know, whether it be the time of the day, what Jesus said, who was present when he was crucified, what the details of his crucifixion were, whether he should have been killed and buried differently, who was at the empty tomb, whether there was even a tomb, and what happened thereafter. We are met with issue after problem, after discrepancy, after outright contradiction.
Best to not be dogmatic. Let's just be human beings and love each other, and stop being so confident in this to a point where you've literally made those who are around you, like I did for the whole 12, 13 years of my extreme ideas of Christianity, ostracized, and feel like that they're less than you, they don't have what you have, they're not as special, or that they're not going to heaven, and all that kind of stuff. So that's my takeaway. My takeaway today is simply pointing out on that particular chapter, it's like, really slow down, everybody, slow down. Like there's plenty of reason to stop and literally question the whole story. That's mine. I didn't get very far in the next chapter, though. I didn't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, so we jump into the veneration chapter. So the chapter is the veneration of the tomb that never happened. Well, the wrong tomb, and much later. Yeah. So the idea is that the tomb, the actual tomb, if you believe Jesus was buried in an actual tomb. So let's grant the Christian this again. What happened to that tomb from then until 400 years later, when Constantine's mother supposedly found the tomb again? Except that's not the tomb. And there's complete silence. So the question is, why do we know nothing about this tomb? Because you can guarantee it would have been venerated, because it was the rising, the resurrection of God in human form, who then resurrected and ascended into heaven. So if you're telling me that if you knew where that tomb was, and we know from Mark and from Matthew, Luke, and John that people knew where the tomb was, so we know that, and I know I've gone off again, but I'm still here in voice. We know
we're like Paul, or no, like the people around Paul at the Damascus Road. We can't see you, but we can hear you, or we can see you, but we can't hear you, depending on which part of Acts you're looking at. But go ahead. I'm listening.
But we know that there are witnesses to the tomb. as according to all the Gospels. And given that there are witnesses to the tomb, you can't say that no one knew where the tomb was, and that's why it wasn't venerated. Because we know the Gospels are supposedly giving us evidence that multiple people, all the disciples, knew where the tomb was, because the woman, and there could have been a lot of women, and one of the Gospels says all of the women were basically there, are then going away and telling the disciples where the tomb was, and then coming back and verifying that they know the location. So the question is, would it have been usual for tombs to be venerated in this time? And my answer would be yes. Raymond Brown, the great Catholic exegete, said there was in this period an increasing Jewish veneration of the tombs of the martyrs and prophets. And even William Lane Craig says, which I quote on page 273, William Lane Craig says, during Jesus's time, there was an extraordinary interest in the graves of Jewish martyrs and holy men, and these were scrupulously cared for and honored. This suggests that the grave of Jesus would also have been noted. The disciples had no inkling of any resurrection prior to the general resurrection at the end of the world, and they would therefore not have allowed the burial site of the teacher to go unnoted. This interest also makes plausible the women's lingering to watch the burial and their subsequent intention to anoint Jesus' body with spices and perfumes. So, you got William Lane Craig arguing really towards some kind of veneration of the tomb. But Jesus himself says in Matthew 23:29, in castigating the Pharisees, he says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous." The monuments can also be translated as decorate the graves. So adorn the monument, sorry. So you have Jesus talking about the fact that Jewish people at the time did venerate, did adorn the graves, did decorate the graves and adorn the monuments. This is something that would have happened, I would argue. Nicholas Delange, a professor of Hebrew, says that of the many Jewish shrines of the Middle East, some of which are undoubtedly of very great antiquity, the most famous were traditionally the supposed tombs of the prophet Ezekiel at El Kifl and of Ezra the scribe at Kurna, both in Babylonia. So you have tombs being venerated. Is the point.
And can you imagine someone they thought was God, not a prophet, but thought was God, isn't getting venerated? Kind of weird, isn't it?
Exactly. And you have to ask why. So you have several options. Either there wasn't a tomb, or they didn't know where the tomb was. Well, we know that they knew where the tomb was according to the Gospels.
Or it was destroyed in 70 AD. But here's the problem. If that is the case, Paul, not once. I mean, our earliest account, you would think if this was a Christian tradition in some sense, he would have practiced it or at least mentioned it or something. So there's just nothing, we can play the coulda, woulda, shoulda, an argument from silence all day long. The problem is you don't see it till 400s AD when they're actually venerating a made up place. There's 3 different places where Jesus was born. If you go to Jerusalem right now, no. That's the fake nativity scene over there. Don't buy into those Anglicans. I'm just being funny here. We Catholics have the right spot, The ankle bone of Peter's at 12 different, I'm just, how they did this with relics and things like that.
It's super important. I just can't imagine it wouldn't have been venerated. So Richard Carrier says he thinks this isn't a strong argument because he thinks the destruction of of Jerusalem in 70 would have just knocked it all out, and you wouldn't know where the tomb was after that. I'm not sure that when Jerusalem was destroyed, it wasn't entirely razed to the ground, and I don't think burial sites would have been the prime target for it being raised. And so I think that if the tomb of Jesus was known before the destruction of Jerusalem, I think it probably would have been known afterwards. But even if you think that destruction of Jerusalem argument's a good one, it would have been venerated before then, and you would have heard about it, and you would have, the Gospels arguably might have mentioned it in some way, or Paul would have mentioned it. That's the important one that you bring.
Or even the element in the Gospels, because the Gospels are written after the war. But either way, if it was a known tradition, you'd think there's like even a fossil of an echo of an oral tradition or something, and there's none of that, which means most likely the entire tomb narratives are fiction.
Yeah. So, what do Christians do to try and defend from this accusation? So one of the techniques they use, or the sort of get out of jail free cards, is that they didn't venerate it for fear of their own safety, which is interesting, because then they are also always talking about how Christians died for the truth. It must have been true because they died for the truth, and there are so many martyrs. It's like, hang on, you can't say on the one hand over here that Christianity has loads of martyrs, and that helps towards thinking it's true. It's more probably true because they wouldn't die for a complete lie. At least they think it's true. Well, yeah. So therefore, they aren't concerned for their own safety because they are, believing in this so forthrightly. You have someone like Byron McCain who states, so he's a Christian who's written about that. He thinks Jesus was buried dishonorably. He says the shame of Jesus's burial is not only consistent with the best evidence, but can also help to account for a historical fact which has long been puzzling to historians of early Christianity. Why did the primitive church not venerate the tomb of Jesus? Joachim Jeremias, for one, thought it inconceivable that the primitive community would have let the grave of Jesus sink into oblivion. I totally agree. And what Byron McCain says, though, is that they were so it was the shame of the dishonorable burial was so great that they didn't venerate it because they were ashamed of it being a dishonorable burial. Well, okay, fair enough, Byron. Like, I can agree with you, but it means that Jesus wasn't buried in a tomb. Right.
Dude, I gotta just give me my 2 cents here. And this may not be a great point, but I feel like it is. That's like saying because the apparatus in which Jesus died on shouldn't have been utilized as a symbol that Christians use even to this day on their necks. Oh, it was so embarrassing that he died on the apparatus of some cross or stake or something. We'll just wear it on our neck, or we'll use it in symbolism when we want to write to other people or whatever. Or here's some of our imagery, right? They put crosses within their imagery or iconography. That to me is kind of equivalent in a way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So
it's
ignoring the cave or the tomb in which Jesus is dying and being buried in is just as ridiculous as saying, well, they would never use a cross. The apparatus is embarrassing. We wear them all the time, and we're absolutely proud of the way our Lord and Savior died. And this is in which he took my sins here. Not only did he take them on this cross thingy, he also took them down into this tomb. We're going to show you where the sin of the world went. I mean, like, why wouldn't that be if that were the case?
Yeah, and I just think that you see how venerated some of these places in Jerusalem are now, and the actual followers of Jesus would have been like falling over themselves to venerate such places. I'm absolutely positive. This is James Dunn, who is a Christian theologian. So he says Christians today, of course, regard the site of Jesus' tomb with similar veneration, and that practice goes back at least to the 4th century. But for the period covered by the New Testament and other earliest Christian writings, there is no evidence whatsoever for Christians regarding the place where Jesus had been buried as having any special significance. No practice of tomb veneration or even of meeting for worship at Jesus' tomb is attested for the first Christians. Had such been the practice of the first Christians, with all the significance which the very practice itself presupposes, it is hard to believe that our records of Jerusalem Christianity and of Christian visits thereto would not have mentioned or alluded to it in some way or at some point. So absolutely right. Like it would have been venerated, and why is there no mention of it?
Oh, hey, Kevin Crady, great comment. As if Christians would be ashamed of the place where their Jesus conquered death. Great way to phrase that. I mean, that's why they do the cross. I mean, sure, it's a shame, but he took my sin here, and here's where he conquered death. I mean, that's a great point. Great comment.
Yeah. So I personally think that when you're presenting a cumulative case, as we have done over all these videos, Derek, we're presenting a cumulative case for why it is not rational to believe that Jesus was resurrected and that the Gospels are not true in their claims. And this is, you're not going to say this alone disproves the resurrection of Jesus, but when you add it to all of the other things we said, it's just another nail in the coffin or another nail in the cross that shows that do you know what, the Gospels got it wrong. Well, they didn't get it wrong. They weren't intending to get it right. I don't think it was,
It's hard to know. It's hard to know so much, but they definitely were writing. Luke seems to try to correct the record. So maybe Luke thought, no, they didn't get it right. Let me set the record straight. And then maybe he's making an attempt at getting it right. What is his real intention? Is he really trying to fake history here? Or, what's really going on with Luke? But you're right. Obviously, he changed things from other gospels he used. Mark, for sure. I think Matthew, but that's just my personal, how I'm looking at these things. No matter if you're a Q guy or not, at the end of the day, you're going to see that. But seems to be. Yeah, I don't know, man. When you walk away from the series, you should have more questions that make you question the whole narrative of what we're talking about with the nativity. Not nativity, sorry. We're getting into nativity, into the passion narrative.
Yeah, and I think this is a case of probability, as with all history. It's like what most probably happened,
right?
Or what is more probable out of these two hypotheses, or three hypotheses, or 10 hypotheses. What's the most probable? And the Christian accounts, the Christian thesis, is the least probable, and it's the least probable for all of the things we said, all the reasons we've given. It's just fraught with problem, with issue.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of things here. Oh, man.
So I think that sort of draws to a conclusion those two chapters, the veneration and the women at the tomb. And there's lots more to be said about the women at the tomb. There's a lot more finer detail, but I'd leave it up to the viewer to go and search those out. But yeah, there you go. The women at the tomb. Are there any comments from your?
Let me look. If you have any questions, feel free to super chat them. I'm looking at a few comments here. Arguments from embarrassment are always tricky because you really have to have a good reason to think you understand what would or wouldn't embarrass the usually anonymous writer. That's a great point. We don't even know who the hell wrote this thing. And yet we're supposed to think they would be embarrassed by it. I guess we could try pulling from cultural examples in the milieu and the timing in which they're writing these particular things. But that's why there's debates till this day with Muhammad. I mean, like the satanic verses, things like this. Like, was this really embarrassing? And some say yes, and some say no. And it just goes back and forth. There's all sorts of different things. Good point. Good point. Any other questions? And critical faculty, we had Oz in the house. We had critical faculty in the house. These are YouTube channels. Go subscribe to my friends, please. If you haven't, I ask that you do so.
I mean, it seems bizarre that the women at the tomb didn't take the disciples with them in the first place. The ones that they do go and pull in to try and verify the empty tomb. It depends which gospel you're reading, but if they do run back and get a couple of the disciples, why didn't they take them with them in the first place? Because they had no way of opening the tomb door anyway. I mean, it's all none of it makes much sense.
Make sure you subscribe to Jonathan MS Pearce YouTube channel as well. He just broke 1,000. All right. T says, where's the Roman custom of the Passover before and after Pilate? Was he a traitor?
I'm not sure what that means, but the Roman custom of the Passover.
Yeah, I'm just reading what was.
I mean, the whole Passover thing is interesting because, John has it. We talked about this quite extensively in previous videos, but just to remind people, John has a different day of Jesus being crucified than the Synoptic Gospels, because John is changing the theology of the crucifixion of Jesus, because he sees Jesus quite literally and obviously symbolically as the sacrificial lamb, as the Passover lamb. So I think John is saying to his audience, you no longer need to eat your Passover Seder as a Jew. You know, this is now being trumped by the Jesus, quite literally by Jesus. So Jesus, the eating of the bread and wine at the Eucharist, you can say is a replacement of the Passover Seder. So Jesus for John is crucified on Passover, and that is the Passover meal. The Last Supper for John is not a Passover meal, but the Last Supper for the Synoptic Gospels is a Passover meal, because they don't have the the requirement to have Jesus being the Passover lamb, the sacrificial lamb. So there's a difference there between the theology of both of them. But Shroud of Turin,
bro. I mean, we should shut the hell up, dude. What do we think we're doing? We know it's the truth, Otangelo. We know the shroud proves it. Can you just let us do what we do? We do this for money. We do this for, we need the attention. We need all of the attention we can get. Just let us be, please. Jeez, always having to debunk us with the Shroud of Turin. It's just ridiculous. Everything you said is wrong, and we know that, but we don't want the audience knowing that. We don't tell them that, though. You know what I mean? Anyway,
it's that magic card, the Shroud of Turin card. Oh, it's all.
I know. I told him to keep the magic trick out of here. Tangelo, we talked about this. Keep it out of here. We don't want people to end up thinking that what you're saying is true. No, but seriously, I think in December, I'm actually going to be interviewing another expert on the topic. So
yeah,
this is another expert. They speak Italian. I'm going to have a translator, and they're going to answer it much more definitively than even Dr. Andrew Casper, which they've really dug into this. And so they're academics in the field. Looking forward to see what they have to say, because when I asked them, is it, really the shroud of Jesus, right? The cloth that was wrapped around the dead body of Jesus, they're not going to keep you mystified. They're going to say exactly what they think and why, and get into the science behind it and all that. So I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, I love it when Otangelo comes in, though. It just kind of spikes up some ridiculous thing on the side. It's always fun. Ben has a question. MythVision podcast. Any thoughts on the various accounts of Joseph of Arimathea? And I think Ben may have missed our episode where we kind of do dive into this.
Yeah. So we did,
because it's more than just Joseph of Arimathea by the time you get into John. That's the interesting point.
So the Joseph of Arimathea was gradually embellished and becomes more and more, prominent. And he goes from being, you could argue that in Mark, he's just a pious Jew. Right, so he's taken down Jesus's body not because he's a secret follower of Jesus, but because he's a pious Jew, and bodies shouldn't be up on a cross or on a post after sundown. So and then in each subsequent gospel, you have the gospel authors attaching more and more detail, like he's then a secret follower of Jesus, and he becomes more and more prominent, and so on and so forth. There are loads of issues with him being a real person. No one knows where Arimathea is. There's no place is known. I know some people don't like the analysis, but Carrier's analysis of the word Arimathea looks like Ari and Matthes, which look like best disciples. So is Joseph.
Bart Ehrman went on record the other day saying that it could mean best disciple town, and that is, there was a secret recording I had to do with 5 other prominent YouTube channels with Bart on my StreamYard. So I recorded the whole thing and I cut it and clipped it and sent them their copies. But in one of those, I can't remember if it's Thomas Westbrook from Holy Kool-Aid or Aaron Ra or something. That question gets addressed, and Bart Ehrman said it could be best disciple town.
Yeah, and I think that makes the most sense, because I really do think the reversal of expectation motif is hugely important. So it's where is Jesus's parents? Well, you've got Mary featuring prominently, and you've got Joseph featuring prominently at the death of Jesus, in the same way that you have them featuring prominently in the birth of Jesus. So I think that the idea that the disciples Scarpa and don't want to know about Jesus at his death. But who's there? Well, actually, it's a Sanhedrin member from Best Disciple Town. He ends up being the best disciple and giving Jesus an honorable burial. Then it's also perhaps, as Dennis MacDonald would say, it's allusion to the Homeric epics and Priam. So Joseph of Arimathea looks to be that figure as well. So it almost certainly not a real historical figure. Very convenient, because obviously all the gospel writers are writing after, I would argue, after the destruction of Jerusalem, which means all the records are destroyed. So you can make up what you like about the Sanhedrin, and there's no records there. The temple is destroyed, all the records are destroyed. So it's really convenient that is a scenario, and the gospel writers can just place this Sanhedrin member in there, and no one can verify and no one can disprove what they claim.
I think it's also interesting that it's not only Joseph of Arimathea and John, you have Nicodemus, which is really like, where's this guy come from? Well, you got to read John to figure that out. Why this book? Why this particular book brings him into the picture. Jojo Freelancer says,
and also, also interestingly, where do they go? So Joseph of Arimathea, who would be a perfect, if you've got a secret Sanhedrin member, follower of Jesus, this is the ideal sort of one of the ideal early church fathers, right? And then he disappears, never to be heard from again. Because actually, he and also he doesn't appear to be working with all the other people. So if he then buries Jesus secretly or buries Jesus in this tomb honorably, and then you've got the woman and the disciples doing all this other stuff, and he's not working with them, then how is he the secret follower of Jesus if he has nothing to do with? It's unintelligible. As I think Raymond Brown admits, that he would have nothing to do with all the other followers of Jesus, and he's just doing this one thing alone, and then disappears, never to be heard from again. And it looks like it's just a reworking of Psalm 22 as well. I think it's Psalm 22, where he's the rich man of the Psalm, which is why the Gospels say, make sure that they use the term rich, prominent man.
Thank you. Jojo says, MythVision podcast, I love the writers that they made this narrative. These are good stories. I do too. Yeah. Okay, even though if you take that literalist approach, like I just did a video the other day on why I love religion. Now, it's not meaning I love all the things that come about religion, but I like studying this stuff. I'm about to lose you. There you go. Yeah. It's okay. Your camera does that periodically on here. I don't know why. But I love studying this stuff, Jojo. I really love to get into this, and I really appreciate that comment. But at the same time, there's that harm that comes with fundamentalism that I'm like, it's ridiculous. You there?
Yeah, I think when you understand the Gospels for what they are, which is theology. So when you're saying, right, I'm going to put my theology hat on and I'm going to read these Gospels, they are superb. They're all slightly different. They're trying to say different things, but when you see the allusions, and you take Matthew and the lengths he goes to link things to the Old Testament, to the Hebrew Bible, to make Jesus the new Moses, to have this allusion and that allusion, it's so clever. They are brilliant pieces of literature. There might be mistakes and there's contradictions if you're looking with your historian's hat on, and they're factually not correct, but they are really fascinating documents.
I'm sorry, dude. Sometimes I just read these comments, man, and it's just hilarious. I don't,
Hi, Caleb.
Our fans are just amazing. You are awesome people. Seriously. Caleb Jackson, thank you so much for the super chat. Dell Allison considers the woman's testimony to be the greatest piece of evidence for the empty tomb. If you had to pick which argument for the empty tomb is potentially most persuasive,
I'm not sure that anything is. I know that's a bit of a cop out. I don't know. They are.
Hold on. Let me phrase it this way. Let me do it better. Can I do a better job? Okay, here's my better job. I asked Dell to put on his critical glasses, right? And purposely, if he were to go with a position that debunked it, right? He went with the magicians stole the body and whatnot. let's play the opposite roles. If you were to try to say what is the best empty tomb evidence for you, or most persuasive, what would it be out of all the data you can imagine?
There's literally nothing. What I think maybe I would say, if you to ask me what's the most persuasive evidence for the truth of the resurrection accounts in some broader sense, because I don't think there's good evidence of the empty tomb. I think to me it's clearly a later device that Mark has invented. So if I was to be charitable to Caleb here, and a Christian, what's the most persuasive argument for some kind of truth to come out of the resurrection narrative? And it might be something like Paul being close to the time and knowing people of knowing Jesus' contemporaries, believing in a resurrection. Would be the closest I could get to something that has some kind of purchase.
Okay.
I don't know. What would you? How about you? I mean, not if it's not the empty tomb. You can answer the empty tomb one.
Yeah. No, I don't. I personally don't find the women at the empty tomb as a good argument, even though Paul doesn't mention it because he says they're androcentric. And this goes to 1 Corinthians 15 for those who are trying to piece this puzzle together. And Dell does spend quite a bit of time on this to try and bring up a point that Paul doesn't mention it because, well, it's a man's thing and he wouldn't mention it. But Mark does. And I thought, well, the early church being androcentric, why didn't they not mention it too? Well, that's part of their story and they think it's embarrassing. I mean, it's possible that could be an argument. I just don't find that to be persuasive. And this question in particular, which argument for the empty tomb is potentially most persuasive?
I don't know that there are many arguments for the empty tomb. I mean, what you've got is just the narrative as given, which has some women. I mean, there literally is the only argument for the empty tomb. Like, so I don't know that I don't know that it's not even an argument. I don't know. Yeah, I mean,
if you, this is the thing. I'll grant this. If you see continuity in 1 Corinthians 15, and that were Paul that actually wrote this in the 50s, and he says he was buried, assuming he means in a tomb, okay, and that he rose from the dead, then, like you said, making that continuity step, if the gospel somehow, and I'm literally bending over backwards to try and, go on the side of saying, hey, if there's continuity here and we're just filling in what was really going on before Paul, but finding it in the Gospels, then that would be the argument I guess you could come up with. The strongest thing is that people believed that they saw a risen Lord. To me, that is the strongest piece of evidence you have, is that people believed it. But are there other alternative explanations for why people believed that or whatnot? That's a different question. So Caleb, I hope I did a better job than Jonathan. If so,
it's a really good question though, because I think we always should try and look from the other side and say, well, what is the best? And I think that's difficult for the empty tomb alone, but for the resurrection as a whole, that is interesting. And I think I'm with you, Derek. On I would go Paul and the fact that people probably believe that they saw something, but then there's we'll come on to the visions and hallucinations and resurrection appearances in a later video, because that'll be a big chunky one.
It's just interesting. Thank you so much for the question, my friend.
Cheers,
and Caleb Jackson has a YouTube channel too. Definitely go check him out. He's been debating more people on this topic. He is a believer, but he's also a universalist to some degree. He's a form of universalism, which means a happy ending for everybody. So yay. Thank you for that super chat. Critical Faculty, thank you for the super chat. Thanks for all your great work, Derek and Jonathan. Thank you very much, my friend. I appreciate it. And go subscribe to his channel. He has Lawrence Krauss and Michael Shermer, and I mean tons of really big names. I think he's even interviewed Dr. Robert Price recently. There's a lot of people he has on his channel that he does interviews with, but really good guy. And he's going to come on at some point. We'll probably be talking about the satanic verses just to get his point of view on it in the Quran. I think he's ex-Muslim and talk there. So thank you so much, my friend. Yeah. Also, Melody Joy for the super sticker. Sweetheart, thank you so much. Yeah, you're not only the amazing cheerleader in the fan booth over here, just rooting us on and keeping us going, but You didn't have to, but thank you so much for helping out. And seriously, are you going to cheer?
I will tipple to you, Melody, because I am the tippling philosopher. I thought I'd just do
Cheers.
that. Cheers. Bit of Pinot Noir.
That's real wine, though, right?
Hey? Yeah.
Oh,
it's actually, it's the blood of Jesus.
Okay, let me see. Did anyone respond? Maybe Caleb called us out and said, "You're full of it." I don't know. Let me see. I'm just being funny.
And to talk about that, but I mean, this is a little bit off topic here, Derek. But the particularly the Catholic understanding of transubstantiation, of the literal. I mean, you go through life not looking in great critical detail at the things that you believe until at some point later you just sit down and look back with fresh eyes and go, "Holy crap, what? That's mental." So when you go through life just accepting the idea that wine represents, not just represents, wine is the blood of God, and the bread, the wafer, is the body of God. You know, if you're a Catholic, I mean, seriously? I mean, that is cannibalism. There's no other way of looking at it, really. And when you look back, you know, when you're in it, you take it all for granted and you're all part of it and you don't really question it. When you're out of it and you go, that's crazy. Because when I was looking at other religions and saying, well, that's just a nuts ritual that you have, there's some kind of religious ritual, and you really you criticize it heavily, but you don't look at your own kind of rituals and go, really?
Absolutely. You always, that's how it is. These, you know, even the Christians who came over to South America, right? You had the Spaniards making their way over there, go talking about these superstitious, like backwards people. Oh my gosh. Here, hand me that wafer and that cracker and that wine. Yes, let me take my God and ingest. Get the hell out of here with that. You know, like it's just funny how people do that. Sure, you might have more civilization in you at the time, but definitely superstitious. Jay Bundy, thank you for the super chat. What's the best piece of evidence for the other side? It's charitable, but it assumes that there's some good evidence instead of providing it. So,
well, yeah, I think, you know, it was interesting when Caleb asked that question. I was having to think. I've thought a lot about religion in general, and my whole, like, I keep talking about my latest book. Sorry to plug it again, but why I'm atheist and not atheist, and I often talk about this wall, and I start off with ontology and go through epistemology and then onto natural theology and onto teleology and onto morality, right? And I end up saying, well, God doesn't exist and here's my moral framework. But my wall is really soundly built, right? And I don't have any missing bricks, and all my bricks are really firm. They're not crumbly. So when I look at things like what's the best argument, what's the best evidence for, like, in general, deism, theism, Christianity, I'm really quite confident, and I'm not being dogmatic and like arrogant, but I'm really quite confident that there isn't very good evidence at all. Like, and I'm not being dismissive and rude. I really just don't think that the Bible provides any good evidence at all. Like the Old Testament, to me, I look at all the ancient Near Eastern texts and I think it's no different to them. There's a bit more interesting theology maybe, but that's an evolution of theology through time. I look at Christianity and go, yeah, whatever, don't believe that for all the reasons I've written about in that book and that book and all of these books there.
On the back, yeah.
Yeah, and so I the only thing that keeps me up at night is the same question that should keep theists up at night, which is, why is there something rather than nothing?
Right.
Like, that's the one question where I go, oh, my brain might start melting here. But that should also be the case for theists, which is, why is there a God rather than, you know, something rather than nothing includes a God. Right, it's either like the universe is a brute fact or God's a brute fact, right? So why is there something, God or universe, rather than nothing? And I think that's a massively interesting question. I don't know that it can be answered, but that's the only thing. Other than that, you know, I really don't think there is a good evidence for for God existing.
Maybe the question, if it was phrased in a way that's less, if you were a believer, then now you got to put on some type of glasses, right? If you were a believer in this story, what would be the best argument you could think of trying to say that there was an empty tomb? You see, because then you gotta then you'd have to start asserting what you think's actually true, and you'd be cautious. I'm sure that when Dale Allison went to answer my question, he wasn't thinking, well, the whole tomb narrative is not true. Like that's fictional. He didn't mention that. He thinks there was still an empty tomb, but that it had to require magicians come and steal the body, because he's still stuck on the firm idea that there was a tomb and that tomb was empty. And when I asked him, so if I'd have said, hey, what's the best argument against it? It didn't even come across his mind to think, well, the whole tomb narrative, the whole thing is actually fiction. He didn't respond that way. So maybe asking us to try and think that way is really difficult. We'd have to put on the I believe glasses really hard. That's why I said 1 Corinthians 15, assuming Paul means an empty tomb. I tried to bend over backwards and like grant continuity that probably doesn't exist there. But either way, you know what I mean?
But this is where, so all the claims are contingent upon sources. So with Paul, this is why I go back to Paul being arguably the best source of some kind of truth, the best argument for some kind of truth in the resurrection narrative, because he's A, the earliest, and B, he is giving, he's not writing a narrative, a story like the gospel writers are. When all the claims in the Gospels are contingent upon sources. So when you talk about the empty tomb, how do we know about the empty tomb? How do we know about the woman? Who are the source? And because we don't know the sources of the Gospels, like there's no clarity on who the sources are. We can't. It's all just pie in the sky.
We don't even know the authors who are writing these Gospels. This is another huge red flag.
Yeah. They use no historiographical techniques. I mean, people say Luke is the best historian. That's absolute rubbish. Go and read Richard Carrier's Not the Impossible Faith, which is an absolutely fantastic book that looks at Luke in particular as not being a great historian. And if Luke is the best historian out of the four and he's not a good historian, then the other three are terrible historians, because they're not historians. None of them are writing history. They are writing theology. And so if you're writing theology and we don't know your sources and we don't even know who you are, the whole thing falls apart. And because it's contingent upon the sources. If you come up to me and give me a fantastical claim about something that happened, I don't know, somewhere else, I'm going to ask you, that's brilliant, Derek. How do you know? So when you're reading the Gospel of Luke, Mark, Matthew, and John, that's brilliant, Mark. Fantastic. How do you know? You weren't there. How do you know? Luke, you weren't there. How do you know? This is all about the sources. And so therefore, if we don't know who the sources are and the authors are not being clear at all, and they say nothing about the sources, then I don't know where you go. I don't know where you go from there, because none of these arguments are good. So that's why I defer back to, if I'm being charitable to Caleb, I say, well, the empty tomb, load of rubbish. They got absolutely no good evidence to suggest that's the thing. Let's talk about the resurrection as a whole. Well, Paul's your best bet because he's the earliest.
Okay.
And that's all you get. He's the earliest, and he's got access to people who supposedly were contemporaries of Jesus.
Thank you. Jamie Waldron said, and thank you for that super chat, Jamie. After 3, 2, 1, count together and say yes or no whether you believe in God, regardless of religions. Discuss after. So 3, 2, 1, no.
Oh.
But because it says believe in God's regardless of religions, or God regardless of religions.
Here's a question for you, Derek.
Mm-hmm.
I almost asked this earlier. So when you were leaving religion, this is kind of the same kind of coded question. In other words, what's the best argument for religion? What did you find was the hardest thing to let go of, or the hardest thing that kept you? What was the last kind of tenuous thread that you had to cut?
As far as religion goes?
Yeah.
Well,
belief in God, religion,
that's what I was going to say, the belief in God. It didn't require for me to have Christianity and its system and the whole empire in order to believe in God. I started leaving the castle of Christianity and still had God, but God got bigger. God became the universe. God was touching every culture. Christianity had elements of truth, just like all other religions in my head. So I still held on to that whole like, why is there anything rather than nothing position?
Yeah.
And I still had kind of the I looked at the universe. It looked designed. These kind of arguments
So
were still in my head.
what was the last tenuous thread of the God belief that you had? Was it design? Was it?
It was ultimately naturalism versus the idea of God. And did I need a God? It was more like I didn't need that to be true. If there is what we need to define what we mean here by God, that something intelligent causes and keeps everything together as we know it. To me, it's just a force of nature at this point. It's become part of the natural world. It is all existence at this point, right? So what's the difference? You're just calling God what exists. It's for me, that's like the last straw for me was going all the way to point like, okay, if there is something, it would be beyond our comprehension or be a natural law of some force that causes the universe to be what it is. That was it. I let go of religion. I just saw things and I said, hold on.
What was the
naturally.
What was the last part of a personal God that you let go of?
Personal God, it would
I'm
be.
just trying to think what was the most like powerful thing of the God belief that held on?
Christianity. I mean, when you have this belief in your mind that God came down, right, and took your guilt, your shame, your weaknesses, your sins, and you had a father who in your own life, and I'm giving you my personal, right, that traumatically put us through some stuff. He struggled with alcoholism, was abusive, and I wanted a father. I knew there was a father. I had an experience, right? So I had the father who wouldn't let me down, who was in heaven. And I had this kind of personal relationship in my head where I talked to this God, and I connected it through this channel called Christianity.
Yeah.
And it was really tight. But that grip was loosened when I saw problems. And those problems I tried to solve with allegory and hyperbole. And I tried to do it with every other type of tool to say, well, this isn't literal. And once it wasn't literal, I kind of started going, well, did this even happen? Once you start asking those questions, did I really need this to be true to begin with? After that, that God got bigger in my head, and I was able to comfortably leave that extremely fundamentalist Christianity view. So God got bigger, but it's control, the Father God's control, if you will, had no control. It had no control in my life. And I started to feel more freedom and less condemnation. And I started going, whoa, like I don't feel guilt anymore at all. I don't have any guilt. It's really strange.
It's why I've interviewed you in the first part of my interview of you, and we're due for a second one at some point. But this is why, I'm adamant that so much of belief is psychology and not philosophy, not history, not theology.
Mm-hmm.
That gets all tacked on afterwards, and that's a kind of form of post hoc rationalization. But it's really psychology that binds you in there, that either gets you in there in the first place or keeps you there. And then once you are able to fulfill those psychological needs elsewhere without of that religious scenario, then you start not needing. So it's really interesting when you said
That's
I didn't
what
need,
happened.
as soon as you start not needing God, then everything else can fall apart more easily. You become much more of a literalist when the psychology is really acting strongly within you. So that's when you're like alive with like biblical literalism, and you're doing this and you're doing that. And then but when you don't have that drive to do that, because you don't have the psychology driving you to do that, then actually it's much easier to let that go and say, actually, that doesn't make sense, and that doesn't make sense. And then it all starts crumbling away.
That's what it seems like to me. That's why I think there are fanatics who kill or be killed for these beliefs. They have that psychology built in. Charles Wilcox is condemning me as Justin Bieber, ladies and gentlemen. Charles, thanks for the super chat. I appreciate it. I'm trying to be a little more manlier than him, but I do appreciate the compliment.
You may not be a believer, but you're a believer. Also.
I'm a believer. Yeah, definitely a believer. Thank you so much. Caleb Jackson is back. My friend, he says, Jonathan, do you think there was a pre-Mark and Passion story used by Mark as a source? Thank you for the super chat, Caleb.
Yeah, so there is a lot of talk about that. I mean, it's hard to know. Again, when you're not discussing sources, you're having to do a whole bunch of inference. Did Mark make this up himself out of cloth? Probably not. So there probably was some kind. He's got a community around him that he will have beliefs that come from somewhere. So he's not like, no one sits down and says, you know what, today I'm going to make up a religious book, or that doesn't happen. So these things come out of a community. These things come out of pre-existing oral tradition. There certainly would have been oral tradition, and that's where you're going to get your pre-Mark and Passion narrative. I think it's interesting when you look at the creed, and you look in 1 Corinthians. Oh, I'm getting lost again, aren't I? Visually speaking. Bart Ehrman talks a lot about this in How Jesus Became God. I think that the creed, you can see a creedal, pre-existing creed that I think underwrites 1 Corinthians 15, is it? So I don't know. I'm getting confusing myself because I can't see myself, and this is making me feel really weird.
Well, in Delcy Allison's book, what he tries to do is he goes in like the Romans 1, or there's these elements what seem to be a previous tradition, oral tradition, going back to 1 Corinthians 15. Where is this at? Like, did Paul just come up with this, or was this something that was already going on? Like, there was already a tradition and a creed. And I think that's what Caleb's trying to say is, if you argue that this goes back further, closer to the time in which this happened, then we don't have 40, 50, 60, 70-year gap between an empty tomb narrative, let's say, and the Gospels. However, one big question I'd have, first, with being extremely cautious on assuming we know what Q actually would have had, or M or L, whatever sources Mark, Matthew, or Luke are using, we don't really know what they would have said. But the Q experts out there, the question is, do they have empty tomb narratives in them? And I don't think they do. Mostly sayings is all they have. So there's no narrative there, from what I understand, I could be wrong, of empty tomb. That seems to be Mark.
I think Paul tells you the bare minimum, and you can start arguing, well, maybe he did know more than that, but he's not communicating it in those particular letters or whatever. But I think those are perfect opportunities for him to communicate those things. The passion. The creed. I think that Paul is alluding to, as Bart Ehrman has it, is this is the creed that I think existed for Paul, so pre-Pauline creed, which is Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, and he was buried. Christ was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and he appeared to Cephas. That is, I think, what Paul is drawing on. But again, that says virtually nothing. And then when you get to Mark sometime later, then you will probably have started seeing a narrative develop, because Mark isn't going to create a narrative out of nothing. So there will have been elements of a pre-Markan narrative, but he is the person who invents, or at least communicates, the invention of these ideas, such as the empty tomb. So I'm fairly sure, I'd put good money that the empty tomb didn't exist before Mark. And when I say before Mark, I mean before Mark and his sources, or his sources. I'm not saying, again, like I'm repeating myself, I'm not saying that Mark sat down and just made stuff up, but Mark and his sources would have represented the invention of the empty tomb. So I think there would have been a development before Mark of these ideas, and then he's the one that's committing it to scroll, if you like.
I'd like to ask Dennis McDonald about the empty tomb at some point, just to get his particular, if there's some emetic maybe some narrative reasoning behind more of a theological, if that makes sense, reasoning behind why Mark would have this. And it becomes more, it seems to be the more naysayer over time that you're dealing with, the more your apologetics are developing and trying to tweak the narrative to make it match more historical, even though it is theological. And they're trying to make this true in the literal sense, have Jesus be really physical, have all, these things start to develop over time. And but Caleb, maybe we are due for a future conversation again with you and Caleb, because he's a really cool guy.
Yeah. I love that talk we had before. I think it's really interesting to put yourself in a position of someone like Mark. So who was Mark? What community was Mark living in? What was he doing? Like literally, what was going on? So he was a guy that was converted or born and brought up in, I don't know, into this religion. He's got people around him, living this religion, this nascent religion, really excited about these claims. And you've got, like we know from the fact that there were non-canonical gospel communities, people believed all sorts of different things. Mark's community just happened to believe this kind of stuff that Mark then probably at one point thought, do you know what? I'm a really good Greek writer. I've learned from the Greek, from my Greek literary from my education in Greek writing, and I'm going to commit this to posterity. I'm going to write this down because I think it's really, really important. What was going on? How did this come about? I think these are really interesting questions, but they don't have clear answers. We're just kind of feeling our way around what someone like Mark, who he was and what he must have been experiencing, in order to then decide to go and put this down and go through the process of deciding what he was going to put down and why.
Thank you, Caleb. Thanks for that super chat, my friend. I appreciate it. Seriously, dude. We're due for a upcoming conversation again, and you're such a kind guy that you're always welcome. I'd always enjoy to have your company and talk about these things. Nicholas, go subscribe to In Time, his YouTube channel. Nicholas, somebody in the comments might can help out. He says Derek looked real manly face planting in a bar in Austin, Texas after thrown by a bull. Just saying. You weren't supposed to tell everybody this. Okay. We talked about this again. All right. For those who don't know, I was just at the Faithless Forum down in Texas. And after we did our little presentation and whatnot, we went out. We had an after party. Then we went out to a local bar, brought my wife, and there was a bunch of people there having fun. And there was a mechanical bull. And so me and Thomas Westbrook, Holy Kool-Aid, I bet him that I would have to buy him the next drink. That was literally the bet because I don't drink. If I lost to him on riding the mechanical bull longer than he did. And I was like, there's no way this guy's going to win. Cause like I got a lot more strength than I thought, he would. Well, it's not about strength. Let's just put it that way. That bull's no joke, bro. Flung me, dude. It by the third, fourth turn, I was faced on the ground. So I guess, did you fracture your wrist riding that mechanical bull, Nick? Because you're wearing a cast now, and I suspect you twisted something. He rode it, though. He rode it longer than I did, so he beat me. Thanks for that super chat.
Be the man.
Mitch Mazarol says, while we still have Jonathan, can you ask him who his favorite modern or current philosopher of religion is and why that's the case? Thanks. Good question, Mitch. Good question.
Oh, my goodness. Put me on the spot now.
Modern now, or current philosopher of religion.
I'll get back to you on that.
So you don't have, can you name three? Does that make it easier?
I mean, yeah, well, I dip into so many things, if philosopher of religion particularly, oh goodness. No, I can't tell you. I need to go and think about that. And this is So it's funny, like I did some quick fire questions when I interviewed Josh Bowen, and we've both got MS, right? We've both got multiple sclerosis, and what that does is it really affects your short-term memory and medium-term memory, which is why I sort of bumble around sometimes trying to find words or trying to remember stuff. And it's why when I do these videos, I've got to reread my chapters because I've forgotten what I've written. Like I really struggle. So when certain questions hit me, and I'm suddenly like. And
well, you're trying to be serious. That's why, and that's not an easy question to answer. What's your favorite philosopher, if you will, in history? Like dead? Is there like 5 you can list off the top of your head, or 3 or something?
Oh, I can list all sorts of philosophers, but it's when I talk about favorite, I don't know that I just have ones that I find really interesting for particular arguments. You know,
okay.
I might be reading Stephen Mason and his ordinary morality presupposes implies atheism, which I think, oh, that's a really interesting argument. And then J.L. Schellenberg talking about divine hiddenness. You know, there's a really interesting argument. So, and I'd say, yeah, you know, I can name loads of philosophers who will give particular arguments, but then I would never sit back and go, he's my favorite philosopher. I say that's a really cool argument. You know, and you look at, say, Stephen Law and his evil God argument. Certain philosophers will have certain arguments that will be really interesting for particular areas. But I'd never then go, right, I'm going to buy all their books or buy, you know.
You mean you're not going to go to their tomb and like.
Like, no, I won't venerate them. Maybe that's why I'm not a very good Christian.
Yeah, you're definitely not. You're just wicked. Thanks, Mitch. Appreciate it. Maybe
I'm going to get back to Mitch.
Okay. Mitch, try to be here for the next video we do on the particular series. Titan Uranus has put the subscribe for Nicholas.
I've just got that. I've just got that. I've seen that name. I've seen that name written so many times. now I've got it.
Hey, make sure you go subscribe to Nick. And Gnostic Informant, my homie Neil, he has been pumping out content with you as well as many other people. Go subscribe to, this is the family, you guys. This is the family. Be part of the family, subscribe to the family, support what we're doing and educating people and continuing to, talk about these ideas. We talk about this stuff every day on MythVision. Like, I mean, I love it. Yeah.
In general philosophy terms, because I'm really interested in whether free will exists or not. It doesn't. I deny libertarian free will. So I really like a guy called Greg Caruso and a guy called Dirk Pereboom. They are brilliant philosophers, but I just thought I'd throw that in there.
You're going to text me for the next 6 hours.
Oh, yeah.
And also, Steve, and this guy, Johnny, like... you got a tippling philosopher stimulated, Mitch. Look at what you did. This guy is all about philosophy. So anyway, thank you, Gnostic Informant. Make sure you subscribe to him. Nicholas says,
I'm just looking at my books on Hegel and German idealism, and it's like, no, they're not my favorite philosophers. Husserl and Hegel and these people are like, Jesus, to just read them is like it's not fun.
I heard.
But yeah, so German idealism is not my bag of chips.
Oh, yeah. I just started a book called on Audible. Someone told me to introduce me to philosophy. I should listen to. It's called that's not it. The Philosophy Book, Big Ideas Simply Explained, and it goes through the history.
Is that not Julian Bagini? Oh no, the philosophy book. Oh no, that's a DK book. That's a Dorling Kinsley book. Is that the one with the yellow cover?
Yeah, it's got a yellow cover. It's got
that's a really good basic philosophy book of all the different philosophers. But I would advise having that in paperback, like in hardback. It's because it's really colorful and really easy to read. Reading it as an ebook probably wouldn't work so well, but that is actually a really nice. If you just want to say, oh, what did this crazy philosopher believe that I've not really read before at a certain point in time, that's a great book to go to and just get an overview of that philosopher. If it's that DK book, yeah.
Couple comments about Karl Marx. Do you enjoy reading Karl Marx?
So I've not read a lot of Marx. I've listened to a lot of stuff on Marx, and he is. If you were to say who do you want to read, next or research next,
right,
it would be probably Karl Marx, because I've been drawing on a lot of sort of Marxist thought recently in terms of just, the value of people in economics, and the value of the worker and stuff like it. It would be, that would be that Marx would be someone I would like to go to next.
okay, dude. Thank you so much, everybody who's like purposely stuck around, and all of your super chats. You keep me doing what I'm doing here at MythVision. Of course, that's a way of supporting the channel. I have to admit that Otangelo destroyed everything we stood for when he just said the words, "The Shroud of Turin," and that was it. It was, but we're going to try and ignore that statement because it destroys our whole notion. We talked about that. They'll keep it off. Anyway, Jonathan, thank you so much. I seriously appreciate it. I hope everybody goes. Join my Patreon. I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. And I mean, this is just, I'm not even scratching the surface when I say there are videos you will never find on YouTube that are here, and I could hit load more and watch what happens. When I do, see what happens. Ready? It loads more. Oh, wouldn't you know it? There's so many more videos, and it just keeps going. Also, the Christmas event coming up with Dr. Bart Ehrman. Go in the description of the video, www.mythvisionpodcast.com/Christmas. And you can go register, check it out, join us there. I might even be hosting it. Like literally, I might actually be the guy who's introducing Bart and bringing him on, and everybody's enjoying learning about the nativity of Jesus. Did it happen? Is it legend? Which you and I are going to be doing a series on your book, The Nativity. I just want everybody to sign up. Hold on, let's see that nativity book there real quick. Boom, in your face.
And that's a lot thinner, but man, it packs a punch. I love this book as well as I love the Resurrection book. So everyone should definitely go out and buy that, especially before Christmas, as we should be covering that.
Awesome. Looking forward to it for sure. Once we're done with a few more videos on the resurrection, we'll be at the nativity. There's a whole series. If you haven't watched our series here on this book, I just put it into a playlist so you can go back and watch first, second, third, fourth. We are on the 7th. This one right now we're recording and about to be done with is the 7th recording in the series. Also, here's the book on Amazon. So if you haven't got the book, get the book. The nativity's next, so you might want to jump on that one. Let me click it here for you. The Nativity, a critical examination on the whole birth narrative of Jesus. Not expensive. And we're going to go through that series as well, and his YouTube channel. Please, someone plug that YouTube channel in the comments so that everybody can subscribe right now. We want to continue to grow his channel. And
thank you, Derek.
Yeah. JM, thanks for that super chat. Again, my friend, I've seen you around, and I really do appreciate the support. But yes, subscribe to A Tippling Philosopher. That glass of wine matches the one he has in his room right now. So if at the very least you may not agree with his ontology for whatever reason, you can agree with that glass of wine, especially if you're a Christian, right?
Right. Absolutely. It is the blood of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Well, it's not really, actually.
I know.
It's just the grapes.
I know. And notice I winked with my eye. Someone's going to think that's the Illuminati symbol. He winked his eye, just in case they were wondering. I do get paid, not much from them, but I'm trying to get a raise. I'm not quite heretical enough, they said. I'm like, really, dude? They try to do my, quarterly review, and the guy was wearing horns. I guess maybe I should wear horns. That might help. Seriously, though, thank you so much. I look forward to next time.
Yeah, thanks, dude. I really appreciate everything you do. You're a good man, Derek. Despite what Otangelo says. So thank you.
I get it. Yeah, I think Otangelo's a decent guy too, despite what Darth Dawkins thinks of him. So for those who don't know, it doesn't matter. But if you do know, then you know. At the end of the day, if you don't know who you are and you want to venerate a tomb, let's just say you're interested in doing so. One day I won't be around. I'll be dead. Hopefully you can find out where I was buried. And if you do, just go to the tomb, look at the gravestone and say, "We are MythVision." Scratch that. Scratch that. We're doing the outro the right way. For those who stuck around, this is the first time I've ever done that.